Hello, this is Pastor Stan Lubeck. This is workshop number 25, A Grand Vision. You know, the famous jurist Oliver Wendell Holmes once boarded a train, but was unable to find his ticket. After watching Holmes fumble through his pocket in growing dismay, the conductor politely said, "That's all right, Mr. Holmes. I'm sure you have your ticket somewhere." Looking the conductor straight in the eye, Holmes replied, "Young man, this is not my problem at all. I don't care about giving my ticket to the railroad. I just want to find out where in the blazes I'm going." It's pretty funny. So that is a powerful question for everyone who is a Christ follower. Do you know where you're going? Do you know where God is leading you? Do you know what your next step is? More importantly, do you know where Jesus is going? Do you know where in the blazes God wants to take you? What is stopping you? What limiting beliefs, anxious thoughts, or fears entering your mind when you think about participating in the most important movement in the history of the world, moving with God? All movements worth embracing are initiated by God Himself. You see, you need a vision for your life that comes from God, a vision for your next step of faith to free you from the bondage of your limiting beliefs. You know, Proverbs 29:18 says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." It's King James Version. This passage is saying that when people don't have a sense of divine direction for life, they scatter in all kinds of directions as they cast off restraint. God-sized dreaming. If you could not fail and God chooses to bless your socks off, what could you expect your ministry to look like 1 year, 2 years, 5 years from now? What do you see with the eyes of faith? You need to trust that God is doing His work beyond what you see. God has been working His plan through small groups for a long time. In Acts chapter 6, when the needs of the widows came to the surface, it's interesting to see who chose the leaders. The apostles gave responsibility to the believers to decide who would best serve them. It wasn't a popularity contest, but the men were selected based on godly qualities. We see shared ownership for the ministry. The qualifications were established, and the task of finding the right people were then turned over to those who were most concerned about meeting the needs of the widows. Secondly, we need to talk about God-inspired recruitment. Selecting the right people to solve problems is the best path leading to a healthy organization. Throughout the Bible, we see the blessing or hardship of the people dependent upon who was in the position of leadership. As the leader goes, so goes the people. Maybe you've heard that before. The next thing we need to realize is that we need to focus on a few. Notice that Jesus spent 75% of His time developing leaders, equipping the 12 to lead the church. The success of Jesus' continued ministry lay in the hands of the disciples He trained. In the book, The Master Plan of Evangelism, Robert Coleman writes, "Why did Jesus deliberately concentrate His life upon comparatively so few people? Had He not come to save the world?" The answer to this question focuses at once at the real purpose of His plan for evangelism. Jesus was not trying to impress the crowd, but to usher in a kingdom. This meant that He needed men who could lead the multitudes. What good would it have been for His ultimate objective to arouse the masses to follow Him if these people had no subsequent supervision nor instruction in the way? Here's where we must begin. Just like Jesus, it will be slow, tedious, painful, probably unnoticed by men at first. But the end result will be glorious, even if we don't live to see it. Seen this way, though, it becomes a big decision in the ministry. One must decide where he wants his ministry to count, in the momentary applause of popular recognition, or in the reproduction of his life in a few chosen men and women who will carry on his work after he has gone. So we need a vision of godly life transformation. Life transformation is what Jesus is about, and He knew that it could not happen by teaching large crowds, so He called a small group of people to be with Him, and He turned them into fishers of men. Following Jesus' example, seeing lives transformed, we must realize that small group discipleship is where Jesus chose to invest the majority of His time. Do you have a vision to join Jesus in seeing lives transformed? Then I have good news for you.
Small group ministry is the best environment for seeing lives changed by the power of God. Leading a small group is the greatest privilege for any Christ follower.
So this grand vision needs to include equipping tiered levels of leaders. Equipping coaches, leaders of leaders, is the most strategic task any pastor can perform in building the kingdom of God. When a pastor becomes a hero maker, equipping volunteer ministry coaches to lead 10 people who are leading 10 people who become a world impacting endeavor. The impact on changed lives becomes exponential. If pastors want to see lives changed for Christ, to see the fruit remain, they must become intentional about discipling people who can disciple others in small group ministry. Disciplers become disciple makers. What church couldn't use an army of small group leaders? What church wouldn't benefit from a healthy spiritual environment where every person is on the path to spiritual maturity and life transformation? So this vision includes the role of small group leaders. And that role of small group leader is the most strategic and important role in God's church. We cannot make disciples of Christ unless people are involved in small groups. We cannot have these small groups unless we have small group leaders. So we envision the church as a teaching hospital. A few years ago, my wife had a sore just above her lip that would not heal. She went to the MD, to the dermatologist, then finally to a surgeon at the University of California at San Francisco. My wife had skin cancer, basal cell carcinoma. We met with various medical personnel, and finally we met with a person who specializes in removing this specific kind of skin cancer. We met with various medical personnel and finally met with a person who specializes in removing this specific kind of skin cancer with the least amount of damage to the lip. Then my wife had, quote, mole surgery, unquote, where they carefully shave off one layer of skin at a time, test it for cancer cells, and then shave off another until they have a layer of flesh void of cancer cells. The procedure is concluded by carefully closing the wound in a manner that would look the best cosmetically for years to come. In the medical field, the more serious the problem, the more specialized the care. I dream of a ministry where we have varying levels of specialized care for every need. This means that we need small group leaders who function like the general practicing doctor, the MD. Then we need more specialized leaders who can function as leaders caring for leaders. Finally, for those very difficult and sticky issues in people's lives, the pastors are like the highly skilled surgeons who have received specialized and technical training. Our church needs to be like a hospital where hurting people can come to have their needs met. Jesus proclaims in Matthew 9:12-13, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Can a surgeon give someone an aspirin? You bet. Is that the best use of a surgeon's time? Absolutely not. How do you see our small groups functioning similarly to a teaching hospital? That's a great question. Do you see how small groups are going to help us to care for the needs of people in a better way? One man chided the church by saying that the corner bar often communicates a more accepting atmosphere than the church. Now, how sad is that? We are not just a hospital, we are a teaching hospital where the surgeons give their best efforts to training and equipping others and multiply quality care outside of the walls of the hospital. It takes many people to make a hospital function in a healthy way. There are nurses, specialists, administrators, candy stripers, and volunteers. Each person plays a role on the team to care for the health of the hurting. What medical role best describes what you dream of doing in God's church in the future? What steps do you need to take to prepare you for the dream that God has given you for your future of ministry? This grand vision also includes MASH units for the wounded. Spiritual warfare is real, and as a result, we have many people who are wounded and hurting. The first need for people who are wounded is to stop the bleeding and then to check their vital signs to determine the best plan of action. For those who come into our ministry with deep wounds and constant bleeding, we have special small groups designed to close the wound and to begin the healing process. We have small groups that we call support groups and recovery groups that function as the mass units of the church. While it is essential to realize that the biggest need for a wounded soldier is to get immediate medical treatment, soldiers are not meant to live in a mass unit. Soldiers are meant to fight on the front lines of the battle. So the goal of the mass unit is to restore the health of the soldiers as quickly as possible so that they can go out and win the war, get back on the front lines. Can you see people in your group with eyes of faith? Can you see past their immediate need for healing and see how they will be used by God to fight the good fight of faith? Who do you see with the greatest potential for future leadership in God's church? What steps does this person need to take in order to be well prepared to handle greater ministry responsibilities? Can you see God using people in your group? Barnabas took a chance on Paul. Can you see with the eyes of faith? How do you see each person in your group when you put on eternal glasses? Can you see the church with the eyes of faith? Do you see the potential of people who are passionate for the homeless, for the abused, for the unemployed, for the illiterate, for AIDS patients, for refugees, for unwed mothers, international students, the terminally ill, homosexuals, single parents, financial counseling, athletes, executives, politicians, homemakers, university faculty, medical personnel, mothers of preschoolers, the elderly, the separated and divorced, the handicapped, those in the hospital, the widows, the orphans, the victims of incest, and those willing to do crisis counseling. Let's not forget prison ministry. You know, the list is endless, isn't it? John 15:8 says, "This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples." The most important responsibility for every Christian is to be filled to overflowing with the fullness of Jesus, then simply spill out into the lives of others saying, "Follow me as I follow Christ." So next session, number 26, leading a great discussion. Don't miss it. God's best to you. Bye for now.